that influence get spread over the world. And aggression was one, slavery was another, proselytization was third, hegemony was fourth, and finally colonization. And in that process of hegemonizing, I think one institution that they created, or they shipped from Europe to elsewhere in the world, is this institution called university. Because without university, created after the European university model, probably this hegemonizing function of the modern West, of the project of hegemonizing, would not probably have been successful. It is the university which ensured that there is a upper crust of every society which should be willing collaborators with the manner in which the West would exert its influence. And like a volcano erupting and the lava spreading all over the world, we had this thin crust got formed of the molten lava, which eventually got crustified. And the thin crust which covered most of the societies of the world, the crust to which you and I belong. Even in today, the participation rate of people in the 17 to 23 age group in universities is about 15%. And only 7% of India's workforce are in the organized sector. 93% of India's workforce is in unorganized sector, which are not under the domain of influence, which are not in the radar of the universities. This colonizing project of the university continued beyond the post-colonial period as well, as we can see very clearly, and particularly since the 90s, in this part of the world, we see in the form of what may be called the emerging globalized neoliberal reality, which I think seems to be more or less becoming a common sense for us. And here I'm trying to I'm trying to recollect some of the forewarnings of this kind of emergence that that we had witnessed right in the 1940s. I'm talking about Orwell's 1984 or Huxley's The Brave New World. Both actually, in a way, presented to them their fears and dreams and aspirations of and anxieties about the way in which the world was moving forward. Much of what Orwell and Huxley, the nightmare of Orwell and the dreams and aspirations of and nightmares of Huxley, I think has more or less found fruition in 2014, by 2014. And there is indeed what may be called a thought control, which is happening much more deliberately, much more effectively today than it did many years ago. And I think we must take credit for that, the university. So the Orwellian maxims like, the one who controls the present controls the past. The one who controls the media controls the mind. This, I think, has more or less been possible because what this collaborative space in which I think all of us coexist, and we have essentially been nurtured to play this role by the institution I represent, university. I would like to remind you of what Chomsky said about newspapers, and that is probably applicable to all media. He said, media or newspaper, I'm just paraphrasing what he said, the media is in the business of selling audiences to advertisers. The basic business of any kind of medium is basically selling audiences to advertisers, and that's precisely the point. I think we need to have these audiences who can comprehend, audiences who can understand the language which is being spoken to. So it's important to have more and more people to be part of this audience. And so I'm not, somebody was talking in the morning about the number of cell phones, which incidentally is more than the number of toilets in India. Yeah. The number of cell phones, it's very essential to have cell phones, because that essentially ensures that there is a large base of this audience willing to listen, willing to be persuaded. This makes our understanding of what change. So change is occurring everywhere, but the only thing is that our understanding of this change is getting more and more skewed and mediated. So I would tend to think, I've been talking the past few months to young people in many parts of the country. My job takes me to several parts of the country, so I keep talking to young people, and I'm somewhat depressed to find that opinions are getting much more homogeneous. The heterogeneity of opinions and the heterogeneity of views, which one used to see earlier among youth, I think people are getting homogenized. And this is something which is very worrying. But I realize that I think what even my sphere of inquiry is also within this crust, the crust of the solidified lava of European universities which have spread all over the world. But if you scratch this surface, scratch this crust, you will get into a space which I think is somewhat difficult to believe what's happening there. In my university, we run a program called the MPhil in Development Practice. If you excuse me, I'll just take a bottle of water. Students of this MPhil program are supposed to live for about 2 semesters, staggered over 2 years in tribal areas. So they are supposed to actually go and live with tribal families and work in tribal villages and so on and so forth. As Vice Chancellor of the university, I make it a point to go once a year when these students are in these places. So last June, I went to Gumla district in Jharkhand, and what I could see there was actually very heartening, because there's enormous change happening there as well. There is winds of change there. Winds of change not necessarily in using the parameters of change which many of us are talking about. It could use different kinds of parameters, but change there is. And of course, superficially, it is also number of motorbikes, a number of cell phones and so on and so forth. But and also mushrooming of private schools everywhere, abandoning of government schools. So in a way, like tribal societies are actually beginning to emulate the trend elsewhere in the country as well. There's a dysfunctionality of state and state organizations. There's a certain disconnect which is happening from these locations from the rest of the country. From one point of view, it is very frightening, because it is also almost it is a secession which is actually underway. But at another level, it is also very, in some sense, I think there's a potential there there's a creativity there which I think can unleash changes, and if it is done properly, it can be done probably without violence. And if one is imaginatively trying to intervene there, then probably there is a space for understanding the change and mobilizing the change in a direction which does not really jeopardize the integrity of the whole society. So this is this I would consider certainly as part of this winds of change. There are something like 100+ districts in this country which has practically no civil administration. That's about 1/5 of the total number of districts that we have in this country. I think it's important for us to understand what's happening there. It's important for us to fill the void that exists there. It's important for us to not allow people to appropriate that space and use that cynically for purposes which are destructive. It's important for people like you and I to get more and more interested in that. I would have been happier had I listened to some of these accounts in the presentations in the morning. But I'm sure that it must have crossed. Some of you said that we didn't have the time to write some of these things, but it's important that how we prioritize even the kind of change that we see around us. I really feel growth by itself is, economic growth by itself as an engine for change is a folklore, I think, which we must begin to question. And there is a need to understand, to go beyond what the growth story tells us. I think it's important for us to understand how this unleashing of the enormous energy of aspirations that's happening beneath the crust. I can see the heat of that aspiration even in institutions as insular as universities. And university systems are responding to some extent, but how the manner in which they are responding is interesting. It's the major distinction between, about a few decades back, the major distinction between the people who, how do I put it, the social stratification ran along the boundary wall of the university. Those who could, they were inside the university. Those who couldn't, they were outside. Those who have, they were inside. Those who didn't have, they were outside. But today, on the contrary, the university is expanding. The social stratification is within the university. But what has happened to university? University is not a homogeneous entity anymore. There are universities and universities. So the question is not whether kids are going to university. The question is who goes to which kind of university. So that differentiation still remains. Social stratification still remains because university is not intervening to structurally adjust those things. All that we are doing is to incrementally push strata up. I think this is something which, as a university, I would, our young university, we would certainly like to address more seriously. What we are doing, one of the things which we are doing is that we think it's important not to respond merely to market demand. Because an institution which merely responds to a market demand is a polytechnic, not a university. A university's job it is to mobilize demand in an area where there is a social need, when that such a need has not manifested as a demand as yet. So it's jolly well the business of the university to mobilize such a demand. So that is something which the universities, in my opinion, are abdicating. And no university will do it. Only public universities can do it. Because they are disengaged with the concerns of, surpluses, profits and so on and so forth, and therefore I think it's a public university which needs to probably do it. But public system, as you can understand, in this country is under siege. Whether it be public education or public health or public transport, you go to All India Institute of Medical Sciences or Safdarjung Hospital or the government hospital in Allahabad, or you go to Air India or come to Delhi University or to my own, you'll find the difference. You'll find how much under siege we feel we are in terms of the kind of pressure there is to respond to masses, to respond to aspirations, but at the same time you're not able to because you do not have the wherewithal of doing it. You do not have the kind of resources. So I do think that it's about time for, it's not business as usual for at least the system I come from, the university. And we probably need to think beyond the kind of solutions we were used to so far. I would end only by saying the following. Winds of change can actually destabilize societies unless there is a built-in societal, there's a built-in force which keeps the roots in place. It's always like a, if I may use a metaphor, a society like individuals have wings as well as roots. Wings left to themselves actually can deroot them, uproot them. So it's important for the roots to be intact as well. The tension between roots and wings is a tension which all of us every institution need to really address clearly. Institution, I mean the state, the judiciary, the way, all institutions of the state, the school, the religion, family, all of them. I think it's important for us to address this particular thing. And in this, there I get a cue from the morning's presentation. I think one segment of our society which is actually ensuring how do you put it, the continuing engagement between the root and the wing is women. Somebody mentioned about the advertisement where the woman is boss at work, but you know, where she cooks for her husband and back home, etc. But that probably is a much more crude and superficial way of depicting it. But I really feel the kind of stress and tension that women really put to ensure that these two opposing forces are reconciled